There we are, careening around our life, and things are flourishing, and there is some tension that we're carrying. We live with some difficulty, struggle, and strife. But there's happiness, and there is the promise of things in the future, trips away, or nights out, or evenings out, or romantic occasions, or some travelling in the future, or perhaps we're going back into education. There's just all the wonder that the world has to offer. And then suddenly ill health, sickness comes along. Injury, unemployment, financial insecurity, and we are slapped about the face, slapped about the experience of life that we were having. And suddenly we are unable to fully modulate to the new thoughts that we're having about how we think life is now going to go. And there's lots of projection into the future, and the tension of that arises in the body, so we feel like we're having to attend to this experiences, and we don't want to, so we shut off. Perhaps we descend into compulsive use of substances or people, places and things, and we self-medicate or we self-soothe, and that's all good. There's no right or wrong. This isn't a moral tale. Yet here we are, we're going through something, we're having treatment for some illness, we're having to look for new work, we're having to navigate the breakdown of our primary relationship, our children are ill, death is around us, sickness is in the home, and we struggle and we suffer. And perhaps we were living out of a sense of fullness and wholeness and spiritual being. We are not numb to the effects of life, should we be on a path or a movement in life, or should we feel whole, should we feel fluid. There are difficulties and traumas on the spiritual path too. As a progressive spiritual seeker, I myself was involved in an accident. It would be more accurate to say that the person whose car hit me on the pavement was involved in an accident, and I was the item that got in the way of their accident prior to them hitting a fence. So I was hit by a car, essentially, as a sincere spiritual seeker, some 10 years into undertaking an investment with an objective, subjective God with a character called God, and lots of, for where I was at the time, spiritual beliefs and practices and tools and resources in a group. The usual spiritual triangle of the inner life, the prayer life, the mindfulness, the practices and the resources and the tools, the journaling, and the reflection and the notes about that reflection and the use of resources and to educate myself and to offer further insight and to read and study. And then the communal or community part of the spiritual life that makes up the whole of the mind, body and spirit paradigm for religious and spiritual life. I was in some use of some of that, and not in as much willingness as I would thereafter be after the accident. I had actually prayed 2 weeks before I'd been hit by a car in a discursive manner as an invitation for willingness to be more sincere in a prayerful life by saying this prayer. Please help me to pray more earnestly, just like that first time when I cried out, there has to be another way, which was really an admission that my way, or trying to find a way on my own resources, wasn't sufficient. So I cried out to a bigger dream, to a bigger undertaking. And after some months and modulation and going through some medical processes and being removed from the usual parameters of everyday living at the time, and given a lot of care, counsel and love and time and patience and tolerance from others and wisdom, was I brought out of that particular season of difficulty and suffering. But I prayed more earnestly to be more earnest in prayer, and 2 weeks later was hit by a car on the pavement. And soon, or as soon as was imaginable, I prayed more earnestly because I was awake to given the progressive nature of my spiritual life at that time, awake to the need to go through a season that of which I could perceive no duration, of what the mystics might call the dark night of the soul, but really just to go through a lot of pain and suffering, to go through the emotional process, to go through the dream of grief, and to initially know that that was a troubling undertaking, a difficult path, made more difficult by my resistance to it. That I would have to attend to thoughts and feelings and some rage, and some projected anger outwardly, and possibly some acting out. These were my usual patterns for suffering, as I've said elsewhere. When I do experience pain and suffering, it doesn't go well. I don't do it well. It's not, and there is no doing it well. Of course, there isn't a fluid and loving and tender way to be rageful. It's we might say it's the ugliness of the human experience. It's the violence of the human experience. Violence is all anger. All violence is anger. Yet, if we can express that anger in a safe and secure way, if we can feel insecure in a secure way, in a secure place, if we can simply articulate it, if we can identify the feeling first, we can articulate it, then we can articulate the feeling, and then we can express it in a safe way, physically, verbally. If we can do that, it's still to mete out that sense of violence and restrict the idea that we introvert it further still and swallow it down and keep it with us, and it manifests in the physical body, and by projecting it outwardly onto other people, by being disproportionately upset about things that we see in the world around us, because the anger cycle is rounding on us and we're unable to process, we're unable to carefully look after and take care of ourselves. So we project that outwardly, we project the anger outwardly in mental violence, and we do ourselves damage and often do others damage. So there was all of that to go through. There was a lot of sadness. Sadness doesn't come easy from this portion of looking at the world. I grieve, but I don't grieve in a linear fashion, in the archetypal fashion of tears. It tends to look a lot more like shutting down, a lot more like transmitting pain outwardly and then having to make amends for and offer some insight and rationale as to why I acted out, without making it all about me at the time. But it tends to spill out of me and it tends to sit with me. And I, like a lot of men do, I do a lot of swallowing. A dangerous mechanism for grief and anger and any feeling really. It's the Adam's apple, bobs up and down, but it's a form of grief. And it's one that I'm aware of that has been of some help. But the spiritual life is not devoid of difficulty, suffering, trouble, and the inability to maturely dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, to dance with the trouble that we're going through. The only way out is through. We have to be pricked by the thorns as we undertake to chop our way through the badlands, slaying the dragons of darkness and difficulty, pulling out the weeds so that the wheat can grow, until we make our way through the pathway, or the only way out is through. The other ways are to put our head in the sand, bury our head in the sand, self-medicate, pretend it isn't happening, deny, avoid, anyway, but go through, and to spiritually bypass the difficulty we're newly faced with. Or the other way is to just meet with a spirit of violence that which we're going through. So the degree to which the difficulty hurts, we meet that hurt with the same degree of hurt, and this is where we do begin to project outwardly, or to pass it on, or try and give it to other people, to shout and scream and stomp. But the middle way, the path of the mystics, is to go through, and the only way out is through in the end. Meanwhile, we might want to go around it, we might want to medicate with some healthy narrative, we might want to just build a new personality in some counselling or therapeutic process. Bearing in mind I'm a counsellor, I'm not against those things, but if they are set just to create a new personality and to not just come to terms with, but come to a place of comfortability without having really descended into the stuff that needs to be descended into in order for the fullest ascent back out. Not into the new, there is no new, not back. There's just a better version of what there is, a better version of this. There isn't really a version, it's just a sense of wholeness, and it's the way in which we have recovered from the experience that we've been through, that we come to a day and a moment and a thought and a feeling and a sensation and a knowingness, an unshaking, tenacious knowingness of radical okayness in the midst of the human experience. To come to that place of having recovered is to have the experience with us and not be had by it. To be able to not move on. There is no moving on. There is just more this. And we are able to hold the tension of what we went through, and we're able to see the patterns and cycles it might have left us with, if there are any. And to be able to love ourselves and love others, and be able to grasp gently that seed of being able to love what we've been through, to forgive and to know self-forgiveness and self-care and wholeness. And ultimately to be able to apply the wisdom of the spiritual walk that we were on, that we became routinely diverted on, to be able to be angry at God and put that out into the universe, but to come to a place of realizing that God didn't do it, that this is the nature of the experience of the world as we see it, that it is lined with opportunities to learn how to coherently experience suffering, difficulty and trauma along the way, and to be a survivor with a capital S, to embody the experiences that we go through, and to bring to that an ever deepening of our spiritual life, our emotional life, we might also say, and in that, the holism of the human experience. So it is. So it should be. This is the way of wisdom when encountering difficulties on the path to pathlessness.